He wasn't yelling. He wasn't causing trouble. He was just black, old, and sitting alone on a park bench. And somehow, that was enough for Officer Denton to say, "Stand up or I'll arrest you for loitering." That's how it starts, not with sirens, but with a smirk and a badge. But what Denton didn't see coming was the woman jogging nearby. The one who stepped in, stared him down, and said, "Let go of him. That's my grandfather, and I'm the Deputy Attorney General." In a single moment, the tables turned. What was meant to be a quiet act of humiliation became the spark that exposed a broken system. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Racism isn't always loud, but when it is exposed, it echoes. If this made your heart race or your fists clench, comment below and subscribe, not just for stories, but for truth we refuse to ignore. Clearwater Park was quiet that morning, as if the air itself hadn't yet decided whether to be warm or cold. The dew on the grass clung stubbornly to the soles of jogging shoes and stroller wheels. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak trees, and the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the distant scent of coffee from a nearby food cart. The city hadn't fully woken up yet, but Thomas Eldridge had been up since dawn. He always was. Thomas, 82 years old and still sharper than most men, half his age, settled onto his usual bench near the duck pond, a battered copy of the Post and Courier folded beneath his arm, and a small to-go cup of dark roast in his weathered hand. He wore his Sunday best, not because it was Sunday, but because, as he often said, a man should dress like he respects the world, even if the world doesn't respect him back. Khakis, polished loafers, a navy cardigan stretched over his shoulders. The silver of his beard was neatly trimmed, and his cane rested across his lap like a loyal old friend. The regulars in the park knew Mr. Eldridge. Some called him Sir, some Coach, some just offered a respectful nod. He had once taught history at the local high school, led a church choir for 30 years, and walked in every civil rights march this city had ever hosted. Now retired, he spent his mornings feeding the ducks, reading the news, and thinking about how much had changed and how much hadn't. That day felt no different, until it did. At 8:13 a.m., a black and white Charleston PD cruiser rolled into the park. It was a new vehicle, still gleaming from the last wash, and it looked out of place against the backdrop of jogging moms and yoga mats. From the driver's side stepped a tall, clean-cut officer, his uniform crisp, badge shining. Officer Craig Denton, freshly transferred from the suburbs, eager, overconfident, and carrying just enough prejudice to be dangerous. Denton's eyes scanned the park like a hawk looking for a meal. They stopped when they landed on Thomas Eldridge, a black man, alone, sitting in a park bench in a predominantly white neighborhood. It didn't matter that Thomas had lived 3 blocks away for over 50 years, or that he'd helped plant some of the very trees that shaded the park now. Denton didn't see any of that. All he saw was someone who didn't look like he belonged. He approached slowly, boots crunching against the gravel path. Thomas didn't look up at first. He finished his sentence, circled a line in the editorial column with a pencil, then calmly set the paper aside. "Morning," Denton said, but there was no warmth in his voice, only the dull edge of suspicion. "Morning," Thomas replied, looking up with a measured smile. "Can I ask what you're doing here, sir?" Denton asked, fingers resting too casually on his utility belt. "Same thing I do every morning," Thomas said evenly. "Drinking my coffee, reading my paper, enjoying the peace. This park," Denton continued, "is reserved for residents of this area. I've lived on Market Street since 1972, Thomas answered, tapping his cane lightly. "The park's a stone's throw from my front porch. You got ID to prove that?" Thomas exhaled slowly, not from fear, but from the weariness of having lived this scene too many times before. "I don't usually carry my driver's license when I'm walking 3 blocks to sit on a bench." Denton shifted his weight, not liking the answer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to either produce identification or vacate the premises." "And what law am I breaking by sitting quietly in a public space?" Thomas asked. Denton's face tightened, A jogger slowed, sensing the tension, but didn't stop. A dog barked in the distance. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edges of Thomas's newspaper. "Loitering," Denton said, disturbing the peace. Thomas chuckled dryly. "Son, the ducks are louder than me." That did it. Denton's pride got the better of him. "Stand up. I'm detaining you for further questioning." "I'm not under arrest," Thomas said, staying seated. "And unless you can articulate reasonable suspicion of a crime, you don't have the right to detain me." Denton reached for his cuffs. "Don't," said a voice from behind. Both men turned. Standing a few yards away was a woman in athletic leggings and a gray hoodie, her earbuds dangling around her neck, her hair tied back tight. Her expression was calm, but her tone brooked no argument. "Let go of him, now." Denton squared his shoulders. "This is police business, ma'am. I need you to step back." She didn't move. "Do you know who this man is?" "I don't care who he is," Denton snapped. "He's being non-compliant." "Non-compliant?" she echoed, her voice rising. "You're harassing an 82-year-old man drinking coffee in a public park." "Lady," I said, "step back." She sighed and pulled a leather badge wallet from her jacket pocket. Flipping it open, she held it out. The sunlight caught the gold seal and Denton's eyes widened as he read the words printed above it. United States Department of Justice. "I'm Ariel Eldridge," she said, "Deputy Attorney General. And that man you're harassing? That's my grandfather." Silence fell like a dropped brick. Denton blinked. Once, twice. A couple on a nearby bench turned their heads. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, already recording. Thomas said nothing. He just watched. Calm, measured, proud. Ariel stepped closer. "You've just escalated a situation with no cause, no legal basis, and in front of multiple witnesses," she said. "You have 30 seconds to release your hold and step back, or I will make one phone call that ends your career before lunch." Denton's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked between Thomas and Ariel, unsure which direction to run, which story to believe. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "And you might want to check the incident report from last week. You know, the one about the unarmed black teenage girl shot during a no-knock raid. That was my cousin, and this time, we're not sweeping anything under the rug." The color drained from Denton's face. His fingers fell away from the cuffs. He took a slow step back, and in that instant, the entire tone of the park shifted. The breeze returned. The jogger stopped to watch. The mother with the stroller paused mid-step. The park wasn't just a park anymore. It was a crime scene, a battleground, a reckoning. Thomas slowly stood, straightening his spine with the help of his cane. "You done, son?" he asked softly. Denton didn't answer. He turned, walked stiffly toward his cruiser, and drove away without another word. Ariel turned to her grandfather. "You all right?" "I'm tired," he said, "but I've been tired a long time. Let's go make this official." And together they walked toward the coming storm, one step at a time. The Charleston Police Department looked exactly the way Thomas Eldridge remembered it from the marches of the 60s, more brick than glass, more cold than welcoming. The only difference now was the paint job and the sleek touchscreen check-in kiosk in the front lobby. The inside still smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee burned onto hot plates, the kind of scent that clung to the walls like memory. He walked in slowly, Ariel beside him, her presence commanding without being showy. She wore a blazer now, swapped for the hoodie, her DOJ badge tucked into a leather case clipped to her belt. Pulses behind the glass reception window glanced up, then did a double take. Some rose to their feet instinctively when they recognized her. Others whispered. A few looked away. It didn't take long before the precinct commander, Captain Sylvia Martinez, came out to greet them. She was in her late 40s, Latina, with eyes that had seen too much and lips pressed in a firm line. "Deputy Attorney General Eldridge," she said, extending a hand. "And Mr. Eldridge, I'm Captain Martinez. I've been briefed." Ariel shook her hand firmly. "Good," We're here to file a formal complaint and request immediate release of body cam footage related to the incident. Martinez nodded. Understood. We'll cooperate fully. Thomas arched a brow. He'd been hearing those words since 1963. They were led into a small interview room. No mirrors, no two-way glass. Just a camera mounted in the corner, and a pair of metal chairs across a scarred table. Ariel sat with practiced ease, pulling out a folder from her briefcase. Thomas lowered himself carefully into the opposite chair, cane resting across his lap. The internal affairs officers arrived 10 minutes later. 2 men in rolled-up sleeves, notepads ready, recording device blinking red. One introduced himself as Lieutenant Bratcher, the other, Officer Liu. Both looked they'd rather be anywhere else. Ariel did most of the talking. She recited the timeline, the sequence of actions, the violations of protocol. She cited federal statutes, Supreme Court rulings, and Charleston's own community policing charter. She was calm, concise, and terrifying. Thomas watched the way the officers scribbled notes, glanced at each other nervously, tried to keep up. Then came his turn. "Mr. Eldridge," Lieutenant Bratcher said, clearing his throat, "would you be willing to recount the events from your perspective?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I was sitting on my usual bench at Clearwater Park. I've lived near there for over 50 years. I had my coffee, my paper, and I was minding my own business." He described the approach, the questions, the demand for ID, the threat of detainment. His voice never wavered, but his eyes narrowed when he got to the part where Officer Denton reached for his cuffs. "I've marched for civil rights," he said. "I've been jailed for less. But I never thought I'd live to see my granddaughter have to step in to protect me. That's what broke my heart." There was a long pause when he finished. No one seemed eager to speak. Eventually, Ariel stood. "We'll expect a written response to our filing within 72 hours, she said, "and we'll be forwarding this directly to the Office of Civil Rights. The DOJ will be monitoring the case closely." Bratcher nodded, swallowing visibly. "Yes, ma'am." As they exited the interview room, a younger officer standing near the hallway stepped aside, offering Thomas a nod. Respectful, quiet. Back in the parking lot, Ariel turned to her grandfather. "That's one part done," she said. "Now comes the hard part." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't the hard part?" "No," she said. "The hard part is making sure this doesn't get swept under the rug like every other time." And she was right. The headlines exploded later that day. "Racist cop harasses elderly black man in Charleston Park." Local news stations aired the story. Clips of Thomas and Ariel walking into the station, phones raised by bystanders in the park. The moment Denton backed down, but it wasn't just a viral video. Ariel made sure of that. The next morning, a formal statement from the Department of Justice was released. The Office of the Deputy Attorney General is conducting a preliminary inquiry into possible systemic civil rights violations within the Charleston Police Department. Then the story of the little girl emerged. Her name was Layla, 10 years old. She had been asleep in her bed when Charleston PD executed a no-knock warrant at the wrong address. They claimed it was a drug raid. They had the wrong house. Layla had survived the shooting, but barely. One bullet had shattered her shoulder. Another grazed her leg. She was Ariel's cousin. And now, the Eldridge family had enough power, enough visibility, and enough fire to light up the whole system. Within days, Ariel had authorized the formation of a federal oversight team. Officers from Civil Rights, Internal Affairs, and the DOJ's Special Investigations Division landed in Charleston. Quietly at first. Then, not so quietly, they started pulling records, disciplinary files, body cam footage, complaint reports that had been filed and ignored for years. They interviewed current and former officers. They held private meetings with community members who had never before felt safe enough to speak. And what they found confirmed the worst. Officer Denton wasn't a rogue agent. He was a symptom of a wider disease. Dozens of complaints, patterns of harassment, glaring racial disparities in use of force incidents. A leadership structure that not only ignored it, but protected it. Thomas sat in his living room, watching the news reports roll in. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just stared. He'd lived long enough to know the difference between noise and progress. Ariel came by later that evening, a manila folder in hand. "They're calling it a pattern of institutional failure," she said, dropping the folder on the coffee table. "And it's just the beginning." Thomas looked at her. "So what happens now?" "Now," she said, "we build a case. A real one. That sticks. And we don't stop at Denton. We go all the way to the top." He nodded, slowly. "Good. But don't forget the people at the bottom. The ones who got hurt. The ones still scared." "I won't," Ariel promised. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas believed it. Not because she said the right words, but because she knew what it felt like to sit on that bench and be told you didn't belong. Because this fight wasn't about one cop. It never had been. It was about making sure the next time a black grandfather sat on a bench in the sun, no one would dare question his right to be there. It didn't take long for the pressure to boil over. Within a week of Ariel's announcement, the Charleston Police Department became the epicenter of national scrutiny. Protesters gathered outside the station every evening, their chants echoing through the streets. Justice for Layla, dignity for Eldridge, no more silence. Local politicians scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. State officials called for audits, and news crews camped outside Clearwater Park, like it was the site of a historic battlefield, because in many ways it was. Thomas watched it all unfold from the sidelines. Not because he wanted to be silent, but because he knew when to speak and when to listen. He'd spent his entire life fighting the long fight. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He was interested in change that lasted longer than a news cycle. But eventually, people came knocking. First, it was a city council member asking him to speak at a public forum. Then it was a school principal inviting him to talk to students about civil rights. Then it was the mayor herself, requesting a private meeting to hear his perspective. Thomas didn't trust politicians. He'd seen too many make promises under pressure and break them the moment the cameras stopped rolling. But Ariel encouraged him to go, not for them, she said, but for the Thebi who were finally listening. So he went. The mayor, a woman in her mid-40s with tightly coiled hair and sharp eyes, greeted him with a tense smile. Ariel sat beside him, silent but steady. The room was plain, no namefair, no media, just 3 people and a closed door. "Mr. Eldridge," the mayor began, "I want to apologize for what happened in Clearwater Park, and for what's been happening for far too long." Thomas didn't nod. He just waited. "We need your help," she continued, "to rebuild trust, to implement reforms that go beyond policy documents, real change." He studied her for a moment, then leaned forward, cane resting between his knees. "Are you asking Thomas Eldridge the man," he said, "or Thomas Eldridge the symbol?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Because if it's the symbol you want," he went on, "you're not getting much more than a statue and a soundbite. But if you want the man, the one who still sells that park every morning, who still believes this city can do better, then I'll need more than apologies." Ariel's mouth curled into the faintest smile. The mayor nodded slowly. "We want the man." And so, for the first time in his life, Thomas Eldridge joined a government advisory board, not as a figurehead, not as a token elder, but as a decision-maker. The board was diverse. Community leaders, civil rights lawyers, educators, young activists, even a few beat cops brave enough to speak the truth. And at the center of every meeting sat Thomas, notebook open, glasses churched on the end of his nose, voice calm but commanding. He didn't speak often, but when he did, the room got quiet. Under Ariel's guidance, the DOJ's oversight unit continued their investigation. Dozens of officers were placed on administrative leave. 5 were indicted. 3 resigned before charges could be filed. But more important than the punishments were the policies that began to take shape. Bias training became mandatory, not just a checkbox on a form, but a series of workshops co-led by citizens who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Body camera footage was released within 48 hours of critical incidents, A civilian review board, with real disciplinary power, was formed. Officers were now required to complete monthly community engagement hours, not handing out flyers, but sitting down at school cafeterias, barber shops, church halls, places where people actually spoke their minds. One of the biggest reforms came directly from Thomas. He called it the Bench Initiative. Every park in Charleston would install a public bench with a plaque, not a statue, not a tribute, just a seat with a name, a real name, of someone from that neighborhood who had once been told they didn't belong. The goal: to make sure no one ever felt like they were trespassing on their own city again. By late spring, the first bench was unveiled at Clearwater Park. Thomas didn't speak at the ceremony. He didn't need to. He simply sat on the bench, same as always, his name engraved beneath him, and nodded to the crowd. People clapped, so cried. A few knelt beside the bench to read the inscription: Thomas Eldridge, teacher, father, veteran, citizen. He sat when the world told him to move. That image of Thomas sitting peacefully under the shade of the oak's cane across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon, was printed on front pages nationwide. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't protest, it was presence, and it mattered. But not everyone celebrated. There were angry calls to the mayor's office, threats scrawled on posters, anonymous letters slipped under Ariel's hotel room door. One evening, a rock shattered the window of the community center hosting a justice forum. Thomas didn't flinch. They always push back when you start to push forward, he told Ariel. It's the nature of things. She nodded. Doesn't make it easier. No, he said. Just makes it necessary. As summer rolled in, something strange started happening. People from neighborhoods that had never mingled before started showing up at the same events. White business owners stood shoulder to shoulder with black pastors. Teenagers with skateboards helped repaint murals alongside retirees. A young officer named Deshawn started walking the beat unarmed. Just him, a clipboard and an open ear. The air felt different, not perfect, not healed, but possible. Then came the phone call. The DOJ had concluded its investigation. Ariel read the findings aloud at a town hall packed to the rafters. Systemic negligence, she said. Racial bias and enforcement patterns. Failure to discipline repeat offenders. Violations of federal civil rights law. The room was silent when she finished. Thomas stood slowly, walked to the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. I didn't think I'd live to see this day, he said. But now that I have, I want to say one thing. He paused, steadying himself on the podium. This is not the finish line. It's the starting point. He turned to Ariel, gave her a nod, and stepped back. Outside, the streets were still buzzing with protesters and counter-protesters, cameras and commentators. But inside that room, something had shifted, something real. And Thomas Eldridge, 82 years old and battle-worn, stood a little taller that night, not because he had won, but because he had reminded a city how to begin. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, Dr. King once said, and this story proves it. Thomas Eldridge didn't set out to become a symbol. He just wanted to drink his coffee in peace. But when dignity is denied, even silence becomes a form of resistance. What happened on that bench was more than a confrontation. It was a collision between the past and the present, and a spark for the future. We're reminded that change doesn't always come with a roar. Sometimes it arrives with a whisper, a cane tapping the sidewalk, and the quiet refusal to move. If this story moved you, leave a comment. I want to hear what you would have done in that park. And if you believe these stories matter, hit like and subscribe to this channel, not for algorithms, for each other. Because the more we share, the harder it is to ignore.